So, welcome to another edition of the Immigrant Education Collaborative Podcast. Today, I have a special guest, a really dear friend of mine, Adam L. Shazli, Interim Director of Buba Baseball, a nonprofit in Baltimore, Maryland. Adam, thank you for doing this. How are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm great. Happy to be here.
Awesome. 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 So, on the show, we talk about either the immigrant experience from the lens of the child or the lens of the parent. So, for you, I wanted you to tell us about, your story about your parents. I know your dad is Egyptian. Just share the story about your parents, how they met and kind of how that helped to shape you, into an adult.
I think I've traveled quite a bit in my life,
Hmm.
and I think it really was reflective of both my mom and dad. They
Hmm.
met in Italy. I couldn't even tell you the year, but probably in the 70s. And they fell in love. They actually lived in Italy for a while, got married in Italy, and then actually had a baby and moved back to the States. So they had a pretty cool, interesting story of just living in Florence. And,
Okay.
I would always hear about them, traveling. And I think my mom, her first experience after Florence was in Egypt while she was pregnant,
Hmm.
and just would tell me about the experiences she had meeting such a big family. And I think,
Yeah.
in Egypt, you don't just have like a brother and a sister in that small family. You have a huge family with cousins and uncles
Hmm.
and aunts. And she got to meet a lot of my father's family at the
Nice.
time, which brought a lot of cool experience.
Okay, cool. So did they have the first child in Egypt or did they come here?
No, they moved back to Massachusetts.
Okay,
Originally, had my brother. He's 3 years older than me.
nice.
And then we moved to, I think we were either in DC or Silver Spring, or they were in DC or Silver Spring at the time. Um, by the time I was born,
Uh-huh.
I was born at home on a snowy day
Okay.
in a Nob Hill apartment complex in Silver
Yeah.
Spring. So I know it burned down a while ago, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
I was born there and lived my, I guess, early childhood there with my mom and my dad.
Okay. Okay. So what was it like having, an Egyptian dad, as you're going to school and going through the the American
Yeah.
education system?
Yeah, my dad was so my dad was cool, when he
Yeah.
was younger. And not to say
Uh-huh.
we as we get older, we evolve our thought process, but he was true and true an Egyptian, I think going through identity himself.
Mm-hmm.
So, later while he was kind of just living life in the 70s, I think by the 80s he started to find religion. He became a sheikh and like had
Mm-hmm.
a big beard.
Yeah.
And, when I was brought up and hanging out with him, I grew up, in the mosque, so
Mm-hmm.
I was a little kid even saying the azan, and it was a wonderful experience because the weekends where we're going to the mosque and having the experiences where we're learning Arabic and learning about religion, but the
Mm-hmm.
food, it's probably one of the more memorable experiences of my childhood. We would sit down and eat with your hands, which was like, for a kid, like that's the best time. You get bread
Yeah.
and all these different foods, and it
Yeah.
was a really wonderful experience.
Yeah, no, that's really
Yeah.
dope, man. So culturally, you had a pretty solid grounding, religion wise and cultural wise in terms of, was it a big Egyptian community that you were part of in Silver Spring?
So, we moved in and out of DC. My dad, like growing up with I don't know if it's the culture, and I don't try to, like there's different classes, right? And I think my
Hmm.
dad came from very humble beginnings.
Hmm.
So, he didn't have some of the same like education or experience of that consistency with
Hmm.
even his parents. I think his mother died when she was real young. His father remarried, and I don't think he had the foundation that we typically see in America. So
Hmm.
that lack of structure, definitely I think impacted how he lived.
Hmm.
So my father, when he came to this country, trying to figure out how to work. One of his
Hmm.
first jobs was creating a business. He was, I think, started off in construction, made his
Hmm.
first construction company called Adam Construction, and it was
Hmm.
really, really good. Like,
Yeah.
I think he was making money. Um, um, it's just organization, right? Once you're making money, having a system and structure to make it successful is really important. Later, he decided to leave the construction business and create a halal meats. It's one of the first
Mm.
halal meats I've ever heard of. The problem with that, and talking about Egyptian culture,
Yeah.
like his brothers, his friends would come over, He
Yeah.
ended up just giving away most of the stuff for free, and I think
Right.
had the struggle.
Yeah.
And I think like as far as being around culture, like a lot of times, we moved around a lot to see different like places, different friends. People
Hmm.
have businesses, so we would go out to eat, and something beautiful is like that conversation, right? So like I loved the Egyptian style of like you eat and you talk and you become friends and you talk about deeper things. A lot of times it was the Arabic. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I was sitting
Right.
there
Right.
and
Right.
waiting for these conversations to finish when I
Yeah.
was younger.
Right.
Um, he had some financial struggles, and
Hmm.
eventually my mom and him parted ways. I think at an early age for me, and I grew having some of that identity, but was missing a lot of it. So when my father left, I was probably about 5 years old,
Okay.
5 or 6 years old.
Hmm.
I never had the chance to go to Egypt at that time, but it was something that was always like missing.
Hmm.
And I think, it really was really emblematic of like my earlier years. Like, I was growing up in school, played sports,
Yeah.
did like the typical American experience.
Hmm.
But also like most kids in high school, you
Yeah.
start to have those adolescence blues
Yeah. Yeah.
and, identity crisis. You're trying to form
Yeah.
like who you are.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
in high school, I remember like I looked Hispanic. I'm
Yeah.
growing up. Like
Yeah.
majority of my school was black and brown, and
Yeah.
like like where do you fit in? I was like, I had curly hair.
Yeah.
You look Puerto Rican. Okay, I'll be
Yeah.
Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
And I think one, it was kind of cool. It was just like fitting in, like to be a part of something. We didn't have a lot of Egyptian kids there, and I think later in middle school and high school, I didn't know too many kids from Egypt or like they had this mixed background,
Right.
and I really fit into the culture that I grew up into. And
Hmm.
look, I was welcome, and if I knew I was Egyptian, I probably would have claimed it a little bit
Yeah.
more. But I
Yeah.
think I was just trying to fit in as an
Right.
awkward teen,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until I was about 20 years old.
Yeah.
I think maybe between 18 and 20, I can't remember the first time I went to Egypt, but after September 11th happened, like I think my identity started to come more real. I went
Yeah.
to PWI. I first went to
Yeah.
Salisbury State
Yeah.
University, and some of the stuff that I saw there just was a bit concerning.
Right.
So I remember they had a peace rally, and it was more like anger and hate,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like coming from DC and like the DMV area
Yeah.
where it's very diverse,
Hmm.
seeing that was pretty. It was just a wake up call.
Right.
And I think I had my first experience. I was lucky and fortunate enough before I went to school. They did a backpacking trip through Poland, and I didn't realize how dope it was at the time. But for 3 weeks, we backpacked and went all around Poland,
Yeah.
and learned about different cultures. So I was interested in really going abroad again.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, my dad, we didn't connect like in person, but he would call me every year or maybe once every 2 years.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, yeah, I'm coming to America or
Yeah.
come to Egypt. And I was like, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. I learned
Yeah.
for me, it was a lot of anger and frustration there.
Yeah.
But I was at a point in time I needed to take a break. And I actually spent a semester in Egypt. I spent 7 months going to Egypt. But the reason I went to Egypt wasn't to actually see my dad. I found I had
Hmm.
two sisters, and it was all new
Mm.
to me at the age of
Yeah.
20.
Yeah.
I found I had a sister that was, I think, maybe 5 or 6 at the time, and
Yeah.
another one that was like 7 or 8. I can't remember their age, but they're right next to each other. I
Yeah.
think maybe 6 and 7 at that time.
Right.
And when I went to Egypt, it was Alexandria. I knew a lot about Egypt. I wanted to see the pyramids. I wanted to go to Luxor and Aswan. I wanted
Hmm.
to travel. And for 7 months, I traveled everywhere. I went to the Black Desert, the White Desert. Over there, I think we even went like close to the border of Libya and like a desert oasis, and
Hmm.
saw some amazing things.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing I found wasn't just the experience of exploring Egypt. It was really finding my identity.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So like all these things that subtly I saw with the eating,
Yeah.
the personality. Like, I did my personality through and through is very Egyptian. I might be
Right.
speaking English,
Yeah.
but like the robust personality, the friendly like culture, the connecting with people
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely was something that I saw in Egypt, and similar to my mom's experience
Hmm.
when my mom went for the first time and saw like the robust family. I met my aunts, my uncles, and everyone acted like they knew me for years.
Yeah.
And for a kid that, struggled with identity,
Yeah.
finding that, I don't know how you describe it, but like it's like you just felt your heart grow, you
Yeah.
know, and the connection I made with my sisters Yosra and Hent,
Hmm.
was a bond that had me going back to Egypt every year. So
Yeah.
after that experience, I graduated in 2005, and then I lived abroad in Thailand and Egypt. I actually went back to Egypt. I thought I was going to study at the American University in Cairo,
Hmm.
um, and I ended up seeing how difficult it was to live in Egypt
Yeah.
and to have a job. That I got a scholarship to study in Thailand. I ended up taking that scholarship to study in Thailand, and lived there for about, I think, 8 years, not 10 years, but 8 years. And every year I would go back to Egypt and I would see my
Yeah.
sisters and kind of rebuild those connections and really, um, forge that identity that I was craving to have.
Yeah.
And, when people ask what I am, I definitely appreciate my mom and say I'm multiracial, but having that Egyptian identity is so important. And look, I'll tell you, I read the book. We grew up in DC was such a unique time in our era. So Afrocentrism was big.
Yeah.
There's a book by Tony Browder. Actually, his daughter was teaching at Maya Angelou when we were there.
Hmm. Hmm.
When I went to Egypt, I had that book and I was reading it. So when I was going to Luxor and the Swan and seeing the diversity of Egypt, like Egypt is unlike anywhere else I've ever been, where you could see somebody with the darkest skin but blonde hair. I was like, yo,
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah.
Blue eyes,
Yeah.
and you can see somebody with like that looks white but like have like really curly hair,
Yeah.
and kind of put your identity of like what you think about race like
Hmm.
on its head,
Yeah.
um, because you realize that like Egypt has been a melting pot
Hmm.
far longer than America has,
Yeah.
and but like there's been different times and eras of Egypt, and
Hmm.
there's a lack of acknowledgement of like the ancient civilizations. I know what kind of the book of Tony Browder was trying to highlight, but
Right.
seeing that, reading it, and meeting people in Luxor and Aswan,
Yeah.
to the Bedouin villages of Siwa and Barea, was just
Yeah.
like a very transformative process in building that identity.
This is a dope endorsement for Egypt, man. I think the tourism board would love to would love to have you on there. But let me ask you this, man. And again, thanks for sharing that, man. It's such a it's a heartwarming story because it speaks to identity, right? So it speaks to you living in America, having an Egyptian father and struggling with your identity as you're in, in one of the most diverse school districts coming up, essentially. You know what I mean? And still trying to figure out who am I? People assume you're something that you're not. You know what I mean? Everyone thinks you're Puerto Rican, and you're just like, no, I don't speak any Spanish. So let me ask you this, man. As you're going through, like you're coming through like K through 12 and you're dealing with this identity, right? Like what are the stabilizing forces in your life as you're trying to get up every day, go to school and just figure life out. You know what I mean? But this you know that your dad is Egyptian, but you're still getting up every day, going to school, just having to get on with it. So what is that experience like, as you got the identity that you're trying to figure out, okay, who am I? You're trying to discover, who is Adam? But then you still have to get up and go to school every day. So what are the things that are kind of keeping you grounded as you go through this process?
I would like to say it was religion, but like when
Hmm.
my dad left, I still identified as being Muslim.
Hmm.
Um, but I met some very powerful Christians as well, and and
Hmm.
and even Jewish folks. Like we're a very diverse melting pot, and you know, um, religion was something I always struggled with as well. I
Hmm.
think when you say those anchors, my mother, definitely was an anchor of making sure that I was at sports practice, I was doing things I needed to do, but she was working a lot of time. I was a latchkey kid, so
Hmm.
I think having a big brother that I could look up to that was kind of leading the way. That
Hmm.
I think when my father left at 5, it's much different than I think an 8-year old or a 10-year old. Um, and my brother, having to deal with that, he took a leadership role as the example that I wanted to follow.
Right.
Even today, we talk about work. I'm now working with my brother.
Hmm.
He was an educator. Probably part of the reason I went into education was
Hmm.
looking at my brother lead the way, and he had different experiences than I did,
Hmm.
but really looking at him as a leader and connecting with him. I think one of the most powerful experiences that I had in Egypt was when we were both able to connect. I was living in Thailand at the time, and I said, "Hey, man, we have to get together." And he spent a month. We spent a month reconnecting in Egypt. So we have an Egyptian mom. My dad remarried to Aziza,
Hmm.
my Egyptian mom.
Yeah.
And I tell you, like, she would keep us so fat. Like we were trying to work out, like, we're young kids, at that
Yeah.
time. I think we just finished college. We're still able to have a metabolism. But when we talk about like meals, like their big meal is during lunch. So she would make, the most amazing meals, literally try to feed us. We're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I'll use a spoon. But
Yeah.
uh, having a big brother to not only be a connector, but also identify with some of
Hmm.
those same experiences.
Yeah.
Um, I know even seeing his skill set in business. So where my
Yeah.
dad was successful initially and
Hmm.
didn't have the structure to be, formulaic or build
Yeah.
the system. My
Hmm.
brother, who was an educator, moved into entrepreneurship and now has a very successful business.
Yeah.
And working with him now, I get to see his mind work in so many complex ways, but create it in the system. And
Hmm.
I think that's where you balance the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And I love my dad.
Yeah.
I think I got to go through the pains of reconnecting with him and
Hmm.
expressing the emotion that I had that was built up. But I think one of the biggest things that I take away is the creativity. He said something to me, and I never forget this. Like we're not dreamers in America. A lot of times we say we are American
Yeah.
dream and all that stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
but a lot of times, we put limitations on ourselves.
Hmm.
And I think he gave me the idea that like if you want to do it, you can achieve it. And he would have these creative stories, like when we didn't, he didn't read, but he had creative stories that I remember him putting us to bed would really have us wonder and think,
Hmm.
like, the guy walking to 7-Eleven, boom, 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 and
Yeah.
just very expressive and connective. And
Yeah.
and I think that those habits, those kind of foundations of connecting with our father, although he left at an early age and we reconnected, I think we exemplify some of that creativity now in the life that we do in education.
Yeah.
Like having the experiences of traveling,
Yeah.
you know, you speak a lot more with your body than you do with the language.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna tell you, like I didn't the body language, like the expressiveness of like Egyptian culture. And this is around the world. It's not just Egypt. I don't want to like say this is only Egypt, but
Yeah.
in Egypt, eta,
Yeah.
like you're like, what is this? Like you speak with your body just as much. So
Yeah.
it's funny because when I was in Egypt, I learned Arabic a little bit. I still
Yeah.
don't speak fluently,
Yeah.
and the more I stayed there, the more I was able to speak. But I spoke with my body, I spoke with my face, I spoke with my gestures more than I did anything else. And when I went to Thailand or when I went to China or other places, I was able to use those expressions to communicate.
Yeah.
So same thing in business. Now, I see my
Yeah.
brother and the way he communicates, yeah, he's strategic and he thinks creatively, but we communicate by connecting with folks. And really, I like to credit, the experience working with my dad,
Yeah.
um, doing that. And I'll say this, look, when he was finding religious, we went to the beach one time and like, I don't know if Sandy Point, Sandy Point is like, the jellyfish. We
Yeah.
would go there and like my dad was the type being broke and growing up poor, like I remember he had we would sit in the back of a van that looks like a sketchy van he used for
Yeah.
construction. This
Yeah.
van had a hole in the van. Like you
Yeah.
would never do something like nowadays. You can get, it's horrible. Like this is
Yeah.
like the van that opened up, you had to go in through the back
Yeah.
and it had a hole. We would literally see the tires spinning. But we went to Sandy Point, in that van, and I remember him talking with like this country guy. Like it was very diverse at
Yeah.
that point, and this guy looked like somebody that will probably be a racist. He was trying to. This is how like how connective my dad was. He started talking to him about Islam and religion and trying to convert him into being Muslim. And
Yeah.
regardless of what the conversation was, it was the ability to connect because they were having a great conversation.
Yeah.
And like if you talk about such a sensitive topic like religion and are able to connect, like that's a skill.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's a powerful experience, and you're
Yeah.
building and bridging. like things like we right now, our society is so divided
Hmm.
that finding ways to connect with people that might be a little bit different, that that might have different viewpoints. We all have commonalities, and it's such a powerful experience that I think that was something that always lives in my mind of something that I always want to do.
Yeah.
Is find how do I connect with this person when I
Yeah.
conversate with them.
Yeah. No, and I think you do a really good job of that. And it's really, and I've known you for a long time, right? And it's reflective of these experiences, right? Of, you going to Egypt, reconnecting with your Egyptian identity, and then also appreciating these stories about your dad, right? And seeing that, that he is human, right? Like you're able to humanize your dad and get a better understanding of who he is and a better appreciation of the skill set that he had. You know what I mean? And then you and your brother, have taken a lot of those traits and sort of built upon them, you know what I mean, with the guidance of your mom and the love of your mom, and just been, two exceptional human beings. So let me ask you this. With that experience, you've been in Thailand, you've been to Egypt, you've been to China, you've traveled, you've been to Poland. The international experience that you had, right? As you sort of, went to college and then you started to, just be kind of a global citizen in a sense. Like, how profound were those experiences for you to just leave the United States and just see?
Well, it's funny. I had to highlight like leaving the country at the time that we did. That wasn't done. Like unless you got money,
Hmm.
and most of the, I mean, even lower middle class, upper middle class, like folks like that wasn't a common thing unless you did it to go to like Hawaii or
Hmm.
or Mexico, Cancun. Um, Traveling, I think at the times that we were, that was before Poland was part of the EU. So
Hmm.
we're looking at Eastern Europe and seeing a different culture. So like, you mentioned four countries. Like I've been to every country in ASEAN, like in Southeast Asia. I've been
Hmm.
to, a bunch of countries in Europe.
Hmm.
I need to be more diverse and going to Africa. I've been to a few countries, Northern Africa, but the idea of going out there, it really similar to the experience in Egypt, kind of broadening like my heart. It broadened my mind.
Yes.
Like I was very like living in our spaces. A lot of times we're in a bubble, and we're in a diverse bubble, so it's
Hmm.
great.
Hmm.
But we still are in a bubble nonetheless.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's different types of traveling. When you're traveling for vacation, it's very different than living and immersing yourself in the culture. So when I
Hmm.
went to Egypt, I was living in an apartment in Alexandria, which like
Hmm.
is right on, Alexandria is close to the beach, it's beautiful.
Hmm.
But I was living how my sisters and my father lived. Like I was
Hmm.
seeing him day to day going to work, driving to Cairo, which was 4 hours away through the desert, and
Hmm.
and seeing it and having that experience really, it was cool to travel, but the experiences that really helped me grow was really when I felt like I was part of the culture. In
Hmm.
Thailand, I bought a motorcycle because I wanted to ride a motorcycle around Thailand. I think there was a movie
Hmm.
that came out. I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to
Yeah.
buy a big bike. I got in an accident. I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know about that. I bought a bicycle and I rode bikes all my life, but I never rode them for days. And I
Yeah.
started doing bike touring where I
Hmm.
traveled to Laos, or I rode a bike with my wife to Malaysia. It was my girlfriend
Hmm.
at the time to Malaysia
Hmm.
for, a week. Our honeymoon was from France to Italy. We spent over 2,500 miles for 3 months traveling around Europe and doing it on a budget.
Yeah.
And I think those experiences help us identify, like even just talking about Europe, like there's a much different experience in France
Hmm.
and Germany than when you go into like the Czech Republic or Poland, and
Hmm.
you could see that when we were traveling, we saw bunkers, like understanding, this is history that you're seeing.
Hmm.
And we were excited with like the Louvre and all these places, but riding bikes around there and
Yeah.
able to see the city from like a bicycle standpoint, we were
Hmm.
able to see history and kind of understand it from a different perspective and read.
Yeah.
Um, I'll give you one more example just in Asia. Going to Cambodia.
Hmm.
I didn't in Massachusetts, where my mom's from, has one of the biggest Khmer populations in America, and I didn't understand, why they were there, but
Hmm.
understanding the Khmer Rouge, uh, yeah, and what happened. with Pol Pot and during that time. I'm so not that we were ignorant. We don't learn about that history.
Yeah.
But when I traveled there, I bought like a Lonely Planet. I bought some of these bootleg books that they would sell on the street, and understanding what happened during that time, it was one of the most prolific experiences because they don't have the same money that they do. Like where when I went to Poland, we saw Auschwitz. Like
Mm-hmm.
Auschwitz commemorates the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
In Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, they just have mass graves where they just kept the T-shirts, and they have a thing of skulls where you can
Yeah.
see bullet holes that go through it, but it's
Yeah.
raw.
Yeah.
And it's if you understand like and you read, like which I was just doing at the time I went there, it was one of the most, impactful experiences of seeing the nature of where they came from and what they had experienced. So when I see the folks from Cambodia or people generations that they came from Cambodia that now live in Massachusetts, and the younger kids have been immersed in American society, are now second generation, uh, 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 you know Cambodian. You see a emergence of culture, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that kind of is reflective of me, where I definitely identify my Egyptian roots, but like it's kind of the growth of this kind of melting pot that we talk about.
That's really dope, man. And I
Yeah.
think as you're telling this story, what I love about the story is how you started the story, right? You started this, we started this interview with you talking about how your parents met, right? And I think your parents were actually like the jump off point for like this global understanding that you have adapted, right? So I want to transition into like how all the personal side, and this is making sense for me because now you like it because I know you a little bit. So now hearing your backstory makes perfect sense how you are, who you are. So like professionally, so we talk about where you got this global education, your dad being Egyptian, getting your Egyptian identity, the travel that you've had. So now professionally, as you're getting into like working in education, working to help young people develop, like how did all those experiences like shape and prepare you to have the type of impact that you've had?
I think I fell into education by accident.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at Big Brother, and like honestly, like with Upper Bound, he was a teacher, a middle school math teacher at the time, and he was teaching in Upper Bound in DC and at Catholic University. Uh, Marlene Guy was the director at the time. She was a staple, I think, for some of the work she was doing. And I didn't. I just did it because I wanted a summer job. I was like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it. Working with youth and working with DC youth at that time, which DC was DC is always going through different transitions, but like that experience, I thought I knew DC, and I had some friends in DC, but like working with kids in the Upper Bound program was not only transformative for me. I know we were supposed to work with them and help mentor them, and we did, and I
Mm-hmm.
had some great experiences with them, but it was so transformative to me as a
Mm-hmm.
college student
Yeah.
because mentoring somebody is probably the most important thing you can do in your life,
Mm-hmm.
as well as being mentored, to
Mm-hmm.
get guidance and give guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that I didn't know at the time, but it was that experience was transforming like my values and what I wanted to do in life. So like, nonprofit work, they find a social movement and that they want to be impactful with. And yeah, that's great and it's important. But I think education as a whole, people are going in there because they want to be those mentors to help create and uplift the next generations. And I think, there's mentors when I first got on there, connecting with people like you that
Mm-hmm.
were in there for the right reasons was very prolific. I remember I talk about this experience to this day. Not to say the student's name, but we went up to West Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
to get some food for some students that we were working with. But seeing West Virginia and the experience that kids coming from DC going there, um, and we talked about diversity, the lack of dealing with the lack of diversity is also something that people need training for,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we saw a couple students that were thriving there.
Yeah.
Had struggles, but like we went over there to help support them and mentor them. I still get calls from that student today.
Mm.
And
Beautiful.
talking about that experience that we did, just talking about wanting to do good. and
Yeah.
connecting with students and building more. Upper Bound, I kind of went on a tangent, but like Upper Bound, was my first introduction to education. I was just a college student, became a counselor there, and started leading with the other counselors as well as like a residential like assistant. Eventually, I went overseas, and I was thrown into teaching kindergarten. I was like, that's a job I can get because
Right.
I had a bachelor degree and
Mm-hmm.
had a little bit of experience. They allowed me to be a kindergarten teacher. After I got my master's overseas, I ended up teaching at the university level, and I liked it, but I definitely had a craving to come back to DC. I did a stint at Georgetown where we did a similar program to Upper Bound, and then found my way, I guess, where I met you as a college counselor with DC Cap, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually became part of the leadership team and running male leadership programs to STEM ready scholarship programs, and it's been a journey, and it's still a
Yeah.
journey now. Now I work with the Baltimore Urban Baseball Association,
Yeah.
and although it says baseball, it's really focused on working with kids holistically
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that no matter what you do, we're kind of forging identity with the youth so
Yeah.
that they could be successful young people
Yeah.
and then successful adults.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that identity, whatever your identity, and a positive one at that, then
Yeah.
you're not going to be successful because you're gonna fall prey and be led into peer pressure.
Well, that's really dope, man. And one of the things I love is when I know, and I said this before, I love it when people are in the jobs that they are, that I trust in that job. You know what I mean? And you're one of those people, man. And when you hear your story, you see how everything has shaped you to be the person that you are. You know what I mean? You're showing up with integrity, you're showing up to help, you're showing up with trust. And I know you personally, you go above and beyond what you have to do. You know what I mean? And you show up when a lot of other people don't show up. So, I got to give you your flowers, man, and tell you that I appreciate you, um, in this moment, but in everything that I've known about you. But let me ask you this. So now as a parent, right? We talked about your dad, we talked about your mom. So now as a parent, with everything that you've been through, you know what I mean? Your identity evolution as a child, you know what I mean? Discovering, sort of your gifts professionally, but now you're a parent, man. So how have all these things shaped you as a parent? Like, what are the things that you kept from, your dad, your Egyptian family, your mom, the American side? Like, how do you put all that together to make
Yeah.
sure that you're being the best parent you can be?
It's hard. It's a journey, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because like you see people a lot of times you see the outside of people and you're like, man, how are they doing so great? But there's a lot of internal growth as a parent that you evolve because a baby's very different than a 5-year old. And
Hmm.
I had four. I don't know if I told you
Mm.
that, but I had
Yeah,
four.
that's real parenting. So I'm gonna let
Yeah,
you finish. So I
yeah,
have two kids, right? And my kids
yeah.
are both over 18. But a really close friend of mine, he used to always tell me when we were younger, and we were parents that, like we had, kids around the same time. And he would say, real parenting starts with three. You know what I'm saying? Because he's like, you got two kids, man. Two kids is easy. You got two hands, you can separate them. But when you got three or four, that's real parenting. So continue.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I think, I had ideas about what it would be like to be a parent. And I think the biggest thing is to put effort, right? There's some, it's just like teaching in some ways, like where you could spend all month building up because you think this is going to be perfect. This lesson's
Hmm.
going to work out and they're going to connect with it. Man, the kids could just they could destroy your confidence and be like, and fall flat. Like I'll give an example. I try to get my kids into a specific sport. I try to get them to play baseball and softball. My girls are like, mm-mm, Dad, no, like not
Yeah.
having it.
Yeah.
Certain things were not negotiable. So like all my
Hmm.
kids played the violin. We're
Yeah.
in the Washington Youth Orchestra. I knew
Yeah.
how important it was playing the violin for me, and that's one of my biggest regrets that I thought it wasn't cool to continue playing an instrument. So I'm really big on musical instruments and
Yeah.
kind of that engagement.
Nice.
But as far as the identity, I think is one of the biggest things. I had three girls, and I think one of them is seeing positive reflection in women leader and people that look like them in
Hmm.
leadership.
Hmm.
So like uh, Tammy Duckworth, she's
Hmm.
a Thai a Thai congressperson uh, that has a amazing story. So like actually wrote a children's book and actually
Mm.
called the office because I was like, I'm gonna get my kids to meet her. Life just
Yeah.
got busy, but they have a picture of her that I had them color, like so coloring page with Tammy Duckworth, and
Mm-hmm.
then identifying Malayla, and I might be saying that wrong, the
Mm.
name incorrectly. I apologize if I am. But like
Mm.
we had a wall that we created of positive women that have similar backgrounds to them. And like as
Mm.
being multicultural, they have Thai, they're Egyptian, and then they're white American as well. So
Yeah.
like identifying all these different attributes and seeing that this is all of them and having positive affirmations for them to
Yeah.
be confident in themselves so
Yeah.
that when they talk to people, like a lot of times people don't know how to talk in complex ways. Um, but my daughter, she just won an argumentative contest in DC.
Yeah.
And part of it was um, confidence in speaking their truth. I think she talked about gun violence. Actually, has
Mm-hmm.
a story, an anecdotal story that I told her
Mm-hmm.
about some of the issues that happened in DC. But having the confidence to speak out loud and knowing who you are is probably one of the things that I'm trying to portray to them. So when we talk about the Egyptian culture, I try to have them speak to my sisters.
Mm-hmm.
My sisters, they want to teach them Arabic, and
Yeah.
they always talk about coming to Egypt, and one day we will.
Mm-hmm.
But with 4 kids in Egypt, like it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I think having the roots also in Thai, like seeing their Thai parents, like we've been to Thailand before. I do plan to go to Egypt when they get a little older,
Yeah.
but so they can have some of that transformational experience that I had. But
Yeah.
really seeing themselves in labeling, hey, you're Egyptian. Like, be proud because you can learn about different things. One thing I have, funny, I had this just on my desk, but they did a project once, and this is from the Black Desert.
Mm.
But I got a rock, and it's just such a unique rock, and they
Right.
have them just all over,
Yeah.
and it's forged. You can see sand in the cracks and crevices,
Yeah.
but I had to talk to him about my experience there. Like I went in the a desert safari for $60 for 2 weeks. No, I think it was
Mm.
like maybe 6 days. I'm lying, it was six
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
But when I went there, it was just like seeing like these kind of wonders of the world. And I'm reminded of like my experience, but this reminds me of much more than just the Black Desert. So it's the identity that was created as a memory. And my daughters brought this when they were talking about Egypt for a presentation, and got
Nice.
to show pictures of my sisters and my
Yeah.
travels there. And hopefully, similar to my mom and my dad traveling to Egypt
Yeah.
and Thailand, or I'm sorry, Egypt and meeting
Italy.
in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
my kids will have a similar exploration because like I
Yeah.
think Germany does this thing. I don't know if you know, like where like after they graduate high school they get a year of exploration that the government will be able to give them some type of allowance to travel to kind of form that identity.
Nice.
I think it's more powerful when like you have parents that can support that. So I know
Mm-hmm.
as my kids are growing older, I want to support their growth and identity and like
Yeah.
forming who they are. It's not,
Yeah.
it, we could talk about cultures and yeah, that helps form our identity, but
Yeah.
that growth is a individual journey that really I want to help and have them do it in a positive way.
And when you say that growth in that journey, are you speaking also like experientially? Like you want them to go and kind of immerse as much as possible in that journey, in those travels.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we
Yeah.
went to Thailand, we got to see, so my wife's family, um, she was adopted, but she has like she reconnected with her biological family.
Hmm.
They have like like a traditional Thai house that's on stilts because they have flooding that happens there, and there's a
Hmm.
rice field in the back, and like seeing the fresh mangoes that grow from the trees, and like that you can have a plentiful diet by just like they go to a local street vendor get some salad, but then you mix it in with the fruit or the vegetables that are just grow naturally around you.
Right. Right.
That experience is like something you could talk about and you could describe, but
Right.
experiencing it firsthand
Yeah.
lets you connect to that in different ways that is kind
Yeah.
of indescribable. And also to see it that that's your family.
Yeah.
So like learning to say Thai words, like they grew up there. My wife speaks Thai to them. but speaking Thai, talking about stories, and experiencing Thailand, firsthand is
Yeah.
really helping forge their Thai identity. So I know the importance of eventually going to meet their grandfather, their Gitto, and
Hmm.
learning to say some of the vernacular and connecting with, the street vendors and the culture is really how they're going to forge their identity in life. It
Yeah.
is not just seeing themselves as Egyptian, but taking pieces and nuggets of the culture
Yeah.
to make them stronger as an individual, to know that they're confident in themselves and this is who they are.
Yeah. No, this
Yeah.
is beautiful, man. And Adam, I can't thank you enough, man. This has been a beautiful conversation,
Yeah.
especially around identity, right? I didn't think we were going to go in this direction, but I'm happy we did, because this is really important. I think it's something that gets overlooked, something that we don't really think about. But even as a child, like you're like it's a struggle. You know what I mean? And for someone like yourself who's kind of going through the world, it's easy for me to just identify as black, right? But for you, it's like it's a little bit more complex, right? Especially if you're in Montgomery County, you're in the DMV, it's like, okay, well, what are you? You know what I mean? Who are you? You know what I mean? So I really appreciate you sharing your story. I'm glad, to hear about the work you're doing. We'll link to the organization in the bio. And I want to thank everyone for joining us on another episode of the Immigrant Education Collaborative Podcast. Thank you, Adam.
I take care. I appreciate it.